What is religion? It literally means to relink. We invoke stories, whether they're true, whether they happen or not. This is a secondary question. We're simply using stories to connect us to the higher good, beautiful, and true, to the divine. What we've been talking about in the relationship to the tarot is the Ace of Cups and the Ten of Cups. They keep coming up. The Six of Cups. This idea of being a cup, being a receptacle, being a recipient. This we've associated with, and the Taoists associated with, winter, with two broken lines on the I Ching. And there is a chart that I've created, I don't know if it exists elsewhere, called the Holy 12, and we'll talk about that today. But also what we're going to talk about today is an approach, a return, a turning point. How do we turn the dial? How do we turn ourselves back to making this moment about this moment? MTM, ATM. How do we summon unconditional positive self-regard, unconditional self-acceptance? How do we humbly appreciate, to humbly appreciate not knowing, to humbly appreciate not knowing? How do we do that? It's very difficult if our parents didn't demonstrate a peace with not knowing. If they felt that they knew, or felt that they needed to know, and felt that you needed to agree with them, or needed to behave a certain way, or be a certain way. And if they didn't give you unconditional positive regard, maybe they had conditions, or maybe they didn't even hold you in a positive way, or maybe it was unpredictable, which is in some ways the worst. So, relinking, religion, mythology. So the mythology that we're going to employ is to imagine that in heaven there's a machine that monitors your mind to see if you're not making this moment about this moment due to lacking, humbly appreciate not knowing, and unconditional self-acceptance, unconditional positive self-regard. If you have thank and you have USA, UPSR, then you can make this moment about this moment. And so then you can be purely receptive. And we talked earlier about the idea of a gavel in a courtroom to quiet everyone. We talked about a twig in the forest to quiet your mind as you listen. The yang energy is that pressing of the button, that mute button. You see the red button on his panel. That just stops the thoughts that are flowing. It requires you asking him to do it. Again, this is a mythology, but you, that little cloudy face down there in the clouds, you're looking up, you're imagining that's what's happening. There's someone up there being overseen by some divine balanced figure moving you towards Sphere 1 and in the Tree of Life, Hermetic Kabbalah. And you see that your mind has gone into the past and the future, gone into thoughts about money, about poverty, thoughts about being desired or desires you have, chastity. And the vow of obedience is just to make this moment about this moment, and we know that's supported by unconditional positive self-regard, unconditional self-acceptance, and making this moment about this moment is also supported by to humbly appreciate not knowing. And so this invocation or this prayer or this request for this divine switchboard operator to reset you is just to say, bring me back to pure receptive. I see that I have failed in my mission to make this moment about this moment. I've basically created a situation where I'm asleep at the wheel, and so the children in the back have to start yammering. Negative adaptive child, negative free child, or maybe negative controlling parent. The grandpa, the grandma, the negative nurturing parent. Negative nurturing parent can be seen as grandpa, grandma also. So they're in the back seat, and only if you're not paying attention to what's on the road do they start talking. If you're fully paying attention, if you're fully ready to hear them speak, they're not going to talk. But so this control operator is monitoring and seeing where the dial is. If the dial is pointing straight up, Sphere 6, Sphere 1, the imagination is aligned with making this moment about this moment. And as soon as you veer off, you make the request and the button is pressed and you reset. Now, if you know to ask this, the operator presses the red button. It resets or reboots you, but the mythology that we're using is that you have to ask for it. You can't just do it. And those figures on the left could be your ancestors, could be helping monitor the panel. But upon pressing that red button, then this new version of you, and then we can look at that cloudy figure as being the new version of you instead of you poking in, either way it works, and is going back down into your body mind, ready to be pure yin receptive and make this moment about this moment and not carried off by SIA and not using FDLJPP. SIA, stories, identification and attachment. That's what we're carried off by. When we're not making this moment about this moment, the mind goes into stories, usually about conditional love, or knowing or not knowing, being a problem. Identification, again, that's the goal of identification, is to get a positive appraisal, conditional, or labeling when there's negative, identification, character flaws, etc. It's not that it's wrong to do this, it's just that it's moving you away from making this moment about this moment. So we're not suppressing such thoughts. We're just saying when they come, fully acknowledge them, we hit the reboot, we request the reboot button, reset button, red button, and then we're willing to go right back to that thought again. But we're doing it with full presence this time. It's a worthy thought to consider. Is this identification, is this story valid? Is it useful, more important? But you can only assess that if you're fully present. If you're not fully present, then you're negative adaptive child, negative free child, negative controlling parent, negative nurturing parent, Karpman drama triangle. They're going to, Enneagram fixation, they're going to make the decision, and they're not qualified to do that. Attachment. We're attached to knowing. We're attached to feeling we need to know. We're attached to conditional positive regard. We're attached to the perception that we have a negative worth, that we're not worthy. Again, all that stories, identification, attachment, if it's coming up, it means you're not making this moment about this moment. Press the red button. That's the yang energy. And then yin, listening very closely, looking at the dial, seeing if you are continuing to make this moment about this moment. Because if you're not, you want to make another request for a reboot. So we're using fear, desire, labeling, judging, planning, and predicting if we are thinking we know or thinking we need to know, and if we're lacking unconditional positive self-regard, unconditional self-acceptance. We're lured by stories, identification, and attachment if we're lost in fear, desire, labeling, judging, planning, and predicting. And that's all fine. It's no problem. It's just a sign that the button has to be repressed. Pressed again. Our mindfulness has to stop being repressed by repressing the button. So we request the button be pressed. Now we can imagine that, just as to keep the fantasy going here, that this figure went into the past, an alternative Earth, to demonstrate how the machine works, not to necessarily tell who in the audience was being monitored at that moment, or maybe there'd be a subject. But the idea is just to say, hey, there's this machine up there in heaven, you're all being monitored, and all you got to do is ask me to press the red button, or whoever your operator is. If there's more than one of us, I can't handle everybody, perhaps, so many people on Earth. You just let me know, and then I will recalibrate you, or reboot you. It's not that you're dying and a new person's coming in, but it's kind of like that. Basically, you're here to make this moment about this moment, and one way to help you do that is if I press the red button, you have to request it. And the way you know to request it is if you're stuck in a story, identification, or attachment, SIA. If you're using fear, desire, labeling, judging, planning, predicting. If any of that's happening, if you're towards Sphere 7 or Sphere 8, negative adaptive child, for Sphere 8, negative freak child, if Tamasic or Rajasic energy, any of that, you're just out of balance, you request a reboot, and then you make this moment about this moment. You're going to get a jolt of unconditional positive self-regard, unconditional self-acceptance, because that new you is coming from the Bardo, coming from the pure yin, coming from heaven, if you want to call it that. And it's going to be able to humbly appreciate not knowing, because it knows that if you did know, life would be meaningless. If you knew exactly what was happening, if you knew what was going to happen, if you knew how to make the best outcome for your ego, you would choose it, obviously. So you want to appreciate not knowing because it makes life workable. Now, if you also do that, the benefit is that you don't believe that you know. You can have a beginner's mind. or you don't have fear that you don't know and you're trying to find out. All that stuff brings you out of making this moment about this moment, and that's what's programmed into this machine. But all you need to do is request it. And that didn't work, let's say, or maybe it worked for that reality, but it didn't work here. So then we have World War II. Individual comes to help one side win the war, but this figure explains that the war isn't actually what's happening with planes and bombs, it's actually happening in the mind. And that's where we come to hexagram 24, return. Every 24 hours we return. There's one yang on the bottom and the rest is yin. And that's what we're talking about here. The pressing of the red button, the request to press the red button, which is kind of the same event, that's the yang. The rest is yin. Just, okay, what was I just thinking? What was the story? What was the identification? What was the attachment? What was the fear? What was the desire? What was the labeling? What was the judging? What was the planning? What was the predicting? Now I'm present to listen to it. And if it doesn't come, it's fine, but you're not trying to suppress it. You're just saying, let me be present for this. This is important. I apologize. I wasn't really there. That's why I requested a reboot, so that I can be present for this thought. It's not that the thought is bad. It is a sign that the button should be pressed again, that you were off balance, that you weren't making this moment about this moment. But this is all much more subtle and gentle. It's just saying, okay, let's be present for it. And so you can imagine this figure turning dials. Maybe one side is one side of the war, and the other side is the other side of the war. And it'd be better if this picture had different uniforms for each side. But the idea basically is that when we're focusing on the return, just immediately go counterclockwise to sphere 2. Right? And we remember call Bardo. Call to the Bardo is the clockwise. We associate the call on the left side to humbly appreciate not knowing. On this chart, it comes out as peace. And if we go with peace, then our approach into hexagram 19, our return is right to the field. And we can just stay right there. If we keep moving, however, if we're going too far over to the right side of the tree of life, we can go into flaying and trying to contemplate even what obstacles are coming up at hexagram 12. This is not saying that standstills only occur if you are on the right side of the tree. So this is not a literal superimpose the tree of life over this. And the fact of the matter is, we may have a desire to go towards truth, which is sphere 1 and at the top of this chart. If you deviate from pure truth, you can be going to meeting, which we can associate with creativity and sphere 2. We can link those two. It's very subtle. But you can also link it to when displacements and breakthrough happens. And with maturity comes understanding. So we can loosely overlay this, but it's not a strict overlay. With the left brain, we have laser vision. With that laser vision, we say, okay, look, I feel like there's something unbalanced here. And actually, these labels are... Oh yeah, okay, that's the left brain, right? So with your right hand, it's that laser vision that's pointing, and you're just saying, okay, I've deviated. It's okay, just request the red button. And then the right brain is more the undifferentiated scan. That's more that outer circle that we've used before, the idea of just being present as being a field of awareness. So we just request that red button be pressed, and then we start again. And then we can imagine that at some point in the far future, or some subtle realm where we can't say if it's reality or heaven, there is a unit, a monitor. Maybe it's all artificial intelligence, maybe it's some kind of combination of angels and technology. But the idea basically is that we're designing ourselves to be calibrated. And so this figure here, he's got the insignia. Maybe it's even impressible if he's not at his control panel and he's at the bathroom or something, or at home. It's remotely linked. But while he's at the panel, he's observing to see, okay, is this person going too far to the right or to the left? And maybe those people behind him aren't just ancestors, they're advisors. They're saying, hey, did you notice on that panel that person is way too locked into a story, an identification, an attachment? There's fear, desire, labeling, judging, planning, predicting. And the operators say, well, they need to request a reboot. I can't do it without them. I can't do it without them requesting it. It's free will. And so we could look at the man in this picture as maybe the positive controlling parent, who's just saying, I hope you remember to press the right button. And then the female figure is the positive nurturing parent saying, it's okay to request the red button. It's not a problem. And then we could also imagine it in a similar scenario. Again, the figure here behind, is it real or is it an insignia? Is it a painting? And in this case, the panel are being shown to the figure, the positive controlling parent and the positive nurturing parent. Again, we're just stereotypes of men and women. And then the idea is that we're making it plain. This is what the panels are, you know. If you've broken the vow of chastity, this slider goes up. If you've broken the vow of poverty, this slider goes up. If sliding up means you're desiring, slider down means you want to be desired. Slider up means you're boasting about your self-worth because of money and feeling secure because you have the money. And the bottom, the slider moving down, is the fear of spending money on yourself or the fear of losing money. None of these are problems. It just means that you want to make this moment to evaluate it with proper balance and wisdom, sphere 6. So in the final image here, we're just showing that how the panel works. Again, this is all abstract. None of these stories are necessarily true, but it's just ways to connect our imagination to do that relinking. So you can imagine this control panel, either in some future world where there's a blend between spiritual and technological. You can imagine it as some kind of elaborate way of stopping war. You can imagine it as an alternate reality where it was presented to people in the 1800s and as a way to try to get them to move out of this propensity that we have for fear, desire, labeling, judging, planning, predicting, such that we are locked into stories, identification, and attachment. If we find those things happening, it's not that they're bad, we just press the red button, we request the red button to be pressed so that we can be rebalanced and make this moment about this moment. When that new figure comes from the clouds, that version of us, that new version of us, it has unconditional self-acceptance, unconditional positive self-regard. It has that to humbly appreciate not knowing, because it just came from non-dual reality, bardo, formlessness, eternity, heaven, Eden. It's going to lose it very quickly, perhaps. That's why it wants to be very yin. The yang is just the impulse to press the red button and the recalibration, the reboot. Then it's all yin. And that's symbolized by hexagram 24. So again, just imagine in heaven there's a machine that monitors your mind to see if you're not making this moment about this moment. And that controller can press that red button, but you just need to know to ask. And if you do ask, the red button is pressed, and to support that making this moment about this moment, which was your request, it was your prayer, is what you asked for, but you just needed a little more appreciation for not knowing, beginner's mind, understanding that life doesn't work unless you are in the dark, even if that brings mystery, and that mystery brings suffering. And you just need a little more positive self-regard. It's unconditional, because you're locked in the story of conditional regard or negative regard, which comes from parents. That's why if you have the ideal parental figures backing up this individual, then this individual is watching the meter, poised for you to be ready. And we saw in the future, he actually has a button on his chest, so if he's in the bathroom or sleeping, in his home, then at that moment he's alerted that maybe you're sleeping too, and you've lacked a little bit of self-acceptance, or you've made self-acceptance conditional, or you're not appreciating not knowing, and so therefore you're locked into fear, desire, labeling, judging, planning, predicting, and you have a story, identification, or attachment going. Not bad. In fact, you want to pay attention to it. The way to do that is to make this moment about this moment. So a new version of you coming, just to do that very thing.